Hey folks, it's your friend Ashton, and welcome to the Rooted Rebellion podcast, the show that's reshaping the food system from the ground up. Hello, and welcome back to the Rooted Rebellion podcast. If you're here for the second episode, bless your heart. It means you found something in the first episode that you liked at least a little bit, and we thank you for that. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to support this podcast, and with it, regenerative agriculture. Welcome to the rebellion. Taking power over your food while rewarding can certainly be daunting. And that's why we're so happy that you're here to learn alongside us. One of the most challenging aspects that I've found when trying to make responsible food purchases is all the seemingly conflicted labels ascribed to products by companies and sometimes even local producers. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Organic, grass-fed, grass-finished, pasture-raised, cage-free, free-range, ethically sourced, all natural. The list goes on and on. Companies greenwashing their products in order to appeal to health-focused consumers have created and appropriated a wide vocabulary that has made ethical spending and consumption all the more difficult. One term that you seldom hear, however, is permaculture. Permaculture is a design approach to regenerative agriculture that, if applied properly, can have ripple effects that touch nearly every area of your life. Its practice requires intention, creativity, and a willingness to submit to Mother Nature's terms. Engaging in permaculture is an ongoing relationship of reciprocity with the land that asks patience and humility of its practitioner. And that's why you don't often find its methods at the industrial scale. If you listen to the first episode of the podcast, then you know that Orion Farmstead operates on a permaculture model. We have today's guest to thank for its design. Kareen Erbe is the founder and owner of Broken Ground, a business dedicated to permaculture education, consultation, and design. Located in Bozeman, Montana, Kareen specializes in helping folks in cold climates produce their own food, promoting resiliency and healthy living. When she's not leading workshops and assisting others with site plans, she's tending to her own badass 3/4-acre homestead that includes chickens, a greenhouse, and a food forest. But you can find all that on her website. What I'm sure you will discover in this episode is what I already know. She is an absolute delight to talk to and a grade A educator. I've had the pleasure of a few fireside chats with Kareen, and I feel privileged to include you all in the conversation here today. So without further ado, here is Kareen Erbe on the healing power of permaculture. Hey, Kareen, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ashton. It's so good to be here.
I am so thrilled. Ever since we had the permaculture design practicum in May, I have been just, fangirling a little bit about getting you on this show. So I am so excited for the wisdom that you have to bring today and just also your lovely personality. It's great to have you here.
Yes, excited to get started and have this chat with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to get us kicked off, would you like to tell the folks a little bit about yourself and Broken Ground Permaculture?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Kareen Erbe, and I own a small business in Bozeman, Montana called Broken Ground. And I teach people how to grow their own food and become more self-reliant. And I teach workshops like the one that I taught at Orion Farmstead. I also do consultations with clients in addition to designs for clients. Just trying to set people up to be more self-reliant, to kind of connect more with the natural world and to build their resilience.
And Kareen, how did you get into this line of work? We're going to talk a lot about permaculture today. So do you want to explain what permaculture is and what called you to play a role in it?
Yeah, for sure. So permaculture stands for permanent agriculture or permanent culture. And it's a design approach for sustainable living and land use that's rooted in the observation of natural systems. So basically how I like to describe it is we're mimicking the natural world in the way that we design our gardens, our yards, but it goes way beyond that in the way that we design our communities, our neighborhoods, even up to our cities. And so it's really looking at the natural world as a teacher and rooting into where you are, and everything that comes with it. So it's both a philosophy and a way of being, and also kind of a boots on the ground. Let's grow more food. Let's grow more wildlife habitat and pollinator habitat. And let's connect into community. The reason I got involved in it is because I had been in the activist circles for quite a while in my 20s and had spent a lot of time in Guatemala. I'd spent a lot of time looking at human rights and social justice issues in Latin America. And it was fascinating and really good and meaningful work. Met some amazing people through that work. But it always seemed like we were always against someone or something, right? That this was going wrong and this was another thing that we were doing wrong. And I think I quickly became burned out of that attitude. I think it's important to have the activists, and it's important to have people who are shedding light on what is happening, just like we have that right now as well. But we also need to provide solutions. We also need to inspire people in positive and creative ways in order to get people to move, to shift culture. And so I just began to look for more solutions-oriented work where it was positive, where it was creative, and where you could affect change. Took a course and I heard the term permaculture and was immediately hooked by kind of what it had to offer and the philosophy of it, and just the solutions that it offered people. That human beings have done a lot of destructive things in the world, but they can also do so many things that regenerate and restore ecosystems and communities.
Beautifully spoken. And I think that the way that you came to permaculture underscores just how holistic of a design technique it is. Well, not a technique, but really a way of living. It seems to be so much more well-rounded than some of the approaches we see in certainly conventional agriculture, but even just growing organics. So can you explain a little bit how permaculture principles differ just from, say, using organic practices?
Yes, that's such a great question, because I think a lot of people do come to permaculture through organic gardening. And the difference is that organic gardening is one of the techniques under the permaculture framework. But permaculture is much broader than that. It's a whole systems design. And so when we talk about whole systems design for a landscape, we're not only talking about the physical landscape that we see of how do we capture water, how do we grow more food, how do we increase biodiversity, right? But we're also looking at the people who live in that landscape and on that landscape and benefit from that experience. And so really bringing in the people who are involved in stewarding the land, what their needs are, what their knowledge is, what their experience is, what their goals are, and what baggage they bring to the table, right? All of that is kind of fundamental to a good sound design. And so it's really getting quiet. It's really observing yourself and the other people that might be on the land with you, in addition to observing the land and what it has to offer and what it needs, right? And how to be in harmony with it. So it just allows people to pause a little bit more. A lot of our culture is like, let's just get it done and be productive. And while all of those things are important, there's also a moment that you have to take, or more than a moment, to observe everything that's going on, both with the people and with the plants and with the animals and the ecosystem in which you're nested.
Yeah, it seems permaculture really asks a lot of the people who are involved with it, but the bounty that it brings is so much richer. We live in this culture that expects everything to be done so quickly, and efficiency is key, and permaculture asks you to sit. And that is really difficult for me, and I know it's been difficult for us as a team to do on Orion Farmstead. So Kareen, if we haven't mentioned, has helped us to design what our future farm is going to look like. She led this really incredible 3-day workshop that I think was a transformational experience for everyone involved. It was definitely a highlight for our team, and I know just for days afterwards, we were just reeling, both from how rewarding an experience it was, but also how much work there was before us. So, yeah, I appreciate you drawing in on the human aspect of it, because I think that so often in these environmental initiatives, we try to separate people and the planet, and really you can't. So I personally appreciate permaculture for bringing in the human aspect of the ecosystem.
Yes, and I think it's what we call social permaculture, kind of in the permaculture jargon, of really looking at people and how do we build that inner resilience and how do we all get along? Because, for those of us who have grown for a long time, plants want to grow. It's the people, a landscape doesn't fail because the plants don't grow. Usually, right? A landscape fails because people don't get along. Or, I've seen with a lot of my clients, it's that the site plan isn't put into place, not because it couldn't be, but because there's something going on with the couple or the family or the group of people that are working together where things just aren't jiving, right? Things aren't working. And that's what's going to prevent, a site plan from being implemented, not so much the apple tree that you're putting in or the gooseberry shrub that you're putting in, right? The natural world is abundant, right? It's just humans that are a little hung up on all of the baggage that we bring.
Yeah, certainly. And it's like you have to grow right along with those apple trees if you're going to be planting them. And that's something that we have certainly seen on the farm.
100%. And I think it teaches that patience. I think that's where, the natural world as teacher is so key, right? We wouldn't be mad at an apple tree for not yielding after just being in the ground for 2 years, right? We can't, right? We know that if you put a bare root young apple tree in the ground, it probably won't yield for 4 or 5 years. You might get a couple apples here or there, but it needs time to grow and develop and root into the place where it is and get the fertility and the sun and the water that it needs. But we make those demands of ourselves, right? To be excellent at something right out of the gate, right? To have figured stuff out right out of the gate. And I think that when we work with the natural world, we see, right, we have to be patient with things, that this is a long game, that your evolution as a human being and the evolution of your landscape and your ecosystem is a long game. And that's not something you can force. It's not something you can kind of think your way through necessarily. It has to happen, unintended. It has to happen organically.
Oh, what a wonderful challenge to us, and specifically in the climate that we exist in these days. I don't know. I hope our listeners can feel it the way that I do. But Kareen, talking to you about permaculture is literally like therapy for me. That's amazing. Thank you.
It's funny you say that, because I had a client tell me that last year, that when she took my program that I offer, and she's like, well, it was cheaper than therapy. That's
yeah. And that's how it feels. And you know what? Maybe we'll just put in a little plug here for you, for our listeners. If you can't afford therapy, check out Broken Ground Permaculture.
Great. Yes, that should be my tagline now.
And that's the episode. Thanks for listening. Anyways, just to steer it back, would you care to share some permaculture techniques with our listeners? Because these ideals are so incredible, but I think if they're anything like me when I was learning about it, you get a little lost in the philosophy sometimes, and you don't know what it even is in practice. So what are some permaculture techniques that you use on your own piece of land?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think I would say, looking at a landscape through permaculture principles, and then I'll tell you how a technique like that would be reflected. So there's a permaculture principle use and value diversity, right? And so what that looks like on your landscape is that you are planting a diversity of different plants for soil building, for pollinator habitat. So rather than a monoculture of, say, broccoli, you're planting in that garden bed a variety of different things that grow with that broccoli that might attract beneficial insects, or they might help repel pests. So maybe you put garlic in there, maybe you put dill in there, or cilantro, all of these plants that will help and support maybe the main crop that you're growing. Or on a perennial scale, right? I'm putting in apple trees and pear and plum trees, but I also have things like Siberian pea shrub and false indigo and clover and lupin and other plants like that that help fix nitrogen, help build the soil, help attract pollinators. So if one crop fails, right, you have other things that will provide food. You don't have all of your eggs in one basket, so to speak, right? So that's one permaculture principle that translates into the technique of, okay, I'm going to grow a diversity of different plants in my system. Another permaculture principle is produce no waste, right? So you're looking, okay, how do I produce no waste on my site? Well, I have a compost pile, right? So I'm composting all of my kitchen scraps, or I have chickens so that I can give some of those kitchen scraps to the chickens, and then there's no waste that's in the system. So that would be another permaculture principle kind of translated into a technique. Or capture and store energy would be, there's so much free energy that's coming onto my site in water, rain, wind. How do I capture that on my site? Well, I can do that with solar panels. I can do that with a greenhouse. I can do that with rain barrels that capture water off the roof, and that water I use in the garden. So every principle in permaculture can be translated into multiple different techniques that might be used on your site to increase your resilience and to increase redundancy in your system, so that if one thing fails, which we know it will, right, in any kind of natural system or just in life in general, right, you have backup. And that's kind of how you start to build a more resilient site.
And I'd also like to highlight something that you brought up during the workshop. Permaculture almost requires you to collaborate with the community around you too. And I think part of the, make no waste is that maybe you're giving what would be considered waste for you to someone else, that they can then use it responsibly, or you can work together in ways to make your system more efficient, but it really does benefit from the diversity of people involved as well.
Yes, I love that. And one of my favorite definitions of permaculture is the art of creating beneficial relationships. So you're creating them between plants, right? In the different plants that you might put in a garden bed or in a food forest, but it's also the beneficial relationships between people. I mean, permaculture brought us together, right? And
Absolutely.
the Orion Farmstead team, and my life is enriched by knowing the three of you. Right. And so it is that invitation to connect with other people, knowing that we're just such a communally oriented society, but we have, in this individualistic culture, especially in the US, we've lost that a lot. And I think that as beneficial as things like the, internet can be, or social media in terms of connecting people, it has people now glued to their phones, and it has them thinking that that's community, when really being in person at that practicum, right? Having those conversations around a meal, right? Or around the fire, those are what enrich your life more than anything, right? And it's reminding people of that as well.
Absolutely. And it's so hard for me not to take this notion of permaculture and try to apply it to what is an ailing American culture.
Mm-hmm.
How much more enriched would we all be if we could really embrace diversity? And how much would we all benefit from really working together, especially as we see just how divisive some of the powers that be are. And it's, it is a real struggle to not try to prescribe permaculture for everyone, to get everyone out here in the garden. And that brings me to a quote that you have listed on your website. All the world's problems can be solved in a garden. Can you explain a little bit what that means to you?
Yeah, I think, and that was Jeff Lawton, I believe, one of my teachers who said that. And, it is simplifying the situation. Obviously, it is maybe more complex than that. But I think one of the reasons why I like that quote is that getting people connected to the natural world and rooting into their place leads to all sorts of beneficial things, both for the human beings and for the natural world. But then much more than that, what the garden becomes is a place of connection for your neighbors and your friends. It's common ground, so to speak, as to your point in terms of the divisiveness. Everyone needs to eat food, and not everyone has the opportunity to grow it, of course, but you can be supporting your farmer and supporting the local food movement. And in so doing, supporting the local economy and your community in the process. So there's a lot that cascades from people connecting in with a garden in their community. And I think that's what we want to remind people of. We have historically always been connected to food. Food has been culture, and culture has been food, right? Of people growing together, harvesting together, eating together, preserving together. All of that stuff has historically been done in community, right? If we think about Indigenous peoples, if we think about the Amish, all of these people have been doing this in community. And if we could connect more in community, we'd realize how much more we have in common. And we'd realize that we don't need to be afraid of people who are different from us. And I think absolutely the permaculture principles could be applied to what is happening right now. You think about a diversity of different opinions and perspectives. The site plan that we came up with Orion Farmstead, sure, we could have come up with that with me working with the three of you, but how much more rich it became by bringing in, however many, I forget, I think there were 20 of us or something, 20 minds into that process, plus which the community that, cascaded out of that. And so, yeah, for all of those reasons, just being able to use the garden as a hub for connection is one step towards solving some of the world's problems. There are many, right?
Yeah, well, you heard it here first. Go plant some squash and tomatoes and everything's going to be all right.
Right, there's some larger systemic issues that we do have to deal with.
Everything's fine. Just tender squash and it's all right.
Everything will be fine.
Yeah. Well, but in all seriousness, though, that is such a beautiful notion. And I just get so excited and a little teary about it. And this light bulb moment that I had during the workshop, you brought up that not everybody has to be a gardener. And that sounds maybe silly when we're talking about everyone meeting in the garden. But think about how many tasks are there. And of course, I was an English major. This is a metaphor, so bear with me.
Excellent. Yes.
Yeah. But, when it comes to permaculture, not everyone is going to be a gardener. Some people are supporting the system. Some people are going to be using principles just to connect with their neighbors, because we still have neighbors, although people want to forget that, And I just think about all the things you can do in a garden other than plant. Like you have some people that are going to be bringing the food to feed everyone. You have elders that are going to be sitting telling stories. You have the people with their hands in the soil. You have folks that would be like building the beds. Like everyone has a role. And that's the point of permaculture in general. Like every piece of this ecosystem has a vital role to play. And I think that is just so indicative of the world at large. And if we could just transfer this methodology, just think of where we would be. I don't know. I get really excited about it.
Yeah, no. And I think that's one thing that I as to your point, not all of us have to be gardeners. And in fact, what I would love to see is the permaculture philosophy being infused in other aspects of society. It's not that all of us have to become these permaculture practitioners, growing food forests on our land. It's that we have to take these principles and apply them to where we work, or to our community, or the nonprofit, or the corporation, or the volunteer board that you're on, or to parenting, like any of those ways in which you can bring those principles into another context. I think it's so powerful because it resonates on so many levels and can be applicable not only to a garden, but to your life. I often say, and we say this in permaculture, that permaculture is life design. And it's, in some ways, it's community design as well. And that if people could lean into that and practice those principles on a daily basis, you don't need to have a garden to practice permaculture. And I think it also lends itself to people really finding what their gifts are. My mission in some ways through my business, or especially when I teach workshops, is to, I'll be the first to tell somebody to quit their corporate job if they're unhappy in it, right? Like,
That's my kind of therapy.
Here we go, back down the therapy. But I think it is because the world doesn't need more people necessarily within this machine. The world needs people with heart doing meaningful work in their communities to elevate themselves and their communities in ways that feel abundant, and in ways that feel integrous, and in ways that feel inspiring. I think there are a lot of people right now working jobs that, they don't want to work. Again, I have the privilege to be in a position that I'm in, right? It's acknowledging that a lot of people have to work a job to pay the bills. But then there is a whole raft of other people who are in jobs because maybe they're comfortable and maybe they have to, of course, pay that mortgage and whatever, but they're kind of not really, deriving a lot of meaning from that. And is that what we're here for on this planet? To just be this cog in this machine? I think we have so many more gifts than that. And I think encouraging people to really lean into what they really want to do and what they're passionate about, while at the same time regenerating ecosystems, like all of that feels really good. It's not about, I forget who said this, but it's not about the pursuit of happiness in this life. It's about the pursuit of meaning. And meaning comes through connection, and meaning comes through, growing pollinator habitat and seeing a bunch of native bees come in. Meaning comes from contributing, from being generous, from doing things that create community and habitat. Well, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I'm here for it. Amen. I get it. And I think that speaks to where so many people are now. Like, I hate to sound like the stereotypical 25-year-old, but like, how many of our jobs are just busy work? It's like we are in school doing busy work, and then you graduate to do a job that has no real meaning. And like, what are you even doing? And yeah, it is just incredibly isolating and frustrating. And I think that brings me to the point of your business. How did you kickstart it? What were the steps that you took? I know that you spent some time just speaking to your community, and it kind of evolved from there.
Yeah, it was small and slow. So I kind of built my business using permaculture principles too. And I think, again, that's a way of infusing those principles into other aspects. But, one of the permaculture principles is small and slow solutions. And so I had a part-time job, and I started by offering workshops, putting up the poster that said, here's this edible backyards workshop that I'm going to offer. I also did talks at the library and hosted film nights, just trying to simultaneously both build a business, but also build a community. And so it was small and slow for a long time. And then my market research was just kind of starting to offer things rather than doing a bunch of research beforehand, being like, will people come to this workshop? Okay, people came to that workshop. Will people come to this other workshop? Okay, it seems like people want to have on-site consultations, and that's useful to them after coming to a workshop. They need that personal, customized one-on-one. All right, I'll start offering that. And then I'll kind of dip my toe into design work. So it was very organic. And as I made more money, I invested more in the business. My initial investment in my business was $50 for a dry erase board and some dry erase markers. And so, I've never been in the red with my business because I built it slowly and eventually, no longer needed that part-time job and went from there. So what I find was really important, in building my business, they talk about the know, like, and trust factor. And now I look back on what I did, and maybe I was doing that unconsciously, but me hosting potlucks, me hosting film nights, me hosting talks that were free at the library was me building my credibility as someone who knew about these concepts, who could speak about these concepts, and who was a hub for all things kind of permaculture and gardening related. And so it was slow, but I feel like, again, like a house foundation, or like when you're developing a landscape and you need to build the soil first, right? The soil is the foundation of your garden. So taking time to do all of that has felt like, now I've grown a business where it feels very solid. And I think when you look at people in business, oftentimes people will start and, stop businesses very quickly, and I feel like now that I've been in business for now that's the staying power, right? Of building a solid foundation and doing it small and slow.
Well, I commend you because patience is truly a virtue, and it is one that I have not yet learned. So that is amazing. Even on the farm, it has been a real struggle for us at times to just rein ourselves in,
Yeah.
and this first growing season has been a huge lesson in learning patience and failure, just accepting failure.
Yes. What? I mean, it's true. And that's what I tell my clients all the time. If you're not failing in the garden, you're not trying hard enough. And I think the garden is such a good teacher in that way. It's going to trigger you in ways that are part of your personality and other aspects of your life, right? Fear of failure, perfectionism, productivity, all of those things kind of get reflected back to you in the garden constantly. And so that's the other beauty of the garden, right? And also very frustrating, right? Like, how do you deal with failure? And how there were moments, some very non-graceful moments early on in my gardening career where I'd lose crops and just be so upset. And now I'm a lot more gracious about it. And I give myself a little bit more rope in terms of this is hard work. And I think that that's something that people don't recognize, in kind of mainstream and the overculture of mainstream society. It's like, farmers aren't respected in the way that they should be. And yet the people who I know who are farmers, because I wouldn't call myself a farmer, I'm a gardener, right, are some of the most intelligent people I know, because they are managing not only the human resources of workers and all of the personalities of that. They are managing, a pretty significant budget. And then they're managing like stewardship of the land and understanding the soil and the climate and the different plants, right? And their interactions. And that takes a whole different level of intelligence, observation, and connection that people, I feel like, take for granted in this society. They take for granted the food on their plate. And that's, part of the issue that we have, that these farmers should be paid way, way more, right, than the CEOs of some of these corporations for what they are managing, because it's way more complex, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that up. It resonates very deeply with my own story. I come from generations of farmers, and I had this streak of teenage rebellion that I didn't want anything to do with it. Like I loved the farm. I loved to be on it. It wasn't anything about trying to leave the land. It was just, I can appreciate it, like viewing it aesthetically, but I don't have any place working it.
Mhm.
And going to college, being an English major, loving my degree, I just still figured out though that I was woefully misinformed. That as much as I love studying English and even the idea of education, it's just that my heart was called back to agriculture. And it's also such a foolish notion that a farmer would not be intelligent, that they would be ignorant. Maybe to some it seems like they have their heads in the sand because they're not up to date on the latest cultural movements, but there is no more well-rounded education than that of a farmer. So, yeah, I 100% agree with that. And
Yeah.
as for the folks that are coming to you these days that want to learn to grow their own food or they're seeking your expertise, what questions do they have? What desires do they have for themselves? Is it just to grow their own food, or do you have people that are just beautification? What are people wanting these days?
Yeah, really good question. I think, they do come to me obviously for the fact that they want to grow their own food. They want to maybe feed their family. They want to feed their family food that is not, doused with chemicals, that they know where it comes from. A lot of people also come to me because they want to grow pollinator habitat. They want to grow something for the natural world. They want to give back in some way. And I think that somewhere unconsciously, they are seeking, like I am, some deeper connection to something more meaningful, some agency in what they are doing, and possibly in a world that is a little bit overwhelming right now. And so I think that that's another reason why people come, that they feel like, you know, whether it's the climate crisis or biodiversity loss or wars, right, or divisiveness or anything like that, they want to be doing something positive for themselves and for their family and for their community. So it can be multi-layered, and sometimes it's just as basic as I want to know how to grow tomatoes better.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think for a lot of people who engage more in depth in the site planning process with me or in my resilient homestead program, it's about something larger than that. It's about contributing and giving back.
Yeah. And during the workshop, you brought up the question, what kind of ancestors are we going to be? And I think so many times we talk about the future we want to leave for the generations that come, and leave it to egotistical me to think of what kind of ancestor I'm going to be instead of like how they're going to live in the world. But, there is something to that. What legacy do we want to leave? How do we want to be remembered? And are the daily actions that we take shaping a future that we would be proud of, even if we're not here to see it?
Yes, I love that. I think that's a question that it's kind of a mantra to live by in many ways, especially during this time. And it's not that we can do this all perfectly. And I think that that's something that we have to remind ourselves of, that when you're nested in an overculture that has very different messaging for us, it's hard to kind of push back against that and live a different life. But I do think that more and more people are asking themselves that question. What can I do to have some agency and to contribute in a meaningful way? And what kind of ancestor will I be? Because it feels oftentimes quite bleak. But I will say that, the design practicum coming out of a weekend like that, any kind of workshop where you're bringing people together around solutions oriented points of view, when you're talking about soil building or growing more food or planting fruit trees or something, that is so generative and so hopeful. And those, in some ways, that's what keeps me going, right? Because you realize in isolation, if you're just staring at your phone, you're like, damn, things are going south really badly.
Ain't looking good, boys.
It's not really looking great out there. But then you have a workshop like that where you're surrounded by 20 people who want to do something in their communities or on their land, or like that's hopeful. Like all of those people, right? There are so many more of us out there. And I think that's what we need to remind ourselves of, is there are so many more people out there who are trying to do good in their communities than there are the people who are trying to break it down.
Can you speak to the difference between self-sufficiency and self-reliance? This is something that you discussed during the workshop, and that's, again, another one of those moments that just blew my mind that I just not even thought of.
Yeah. So self-sufficiency is, producing as much food as you can and your own energy, and you're off grid, and you're like living somewhere in the woods or wherever, like on a piece of land on your own or with you and just your family, meeting all of your needs, which is fine. But I prefer the term self-reliance because we actually do want to rely on each other, right? We are communal people. And so I want to support that farmer. I want to support Amalthea Organic Dairy who grows goat cheese, right? Who makes goat cheese. I want to support that farmer's livelihood. I want to support Highland Harmony Farm that produces chickpeas and lentils and different flour, because I want them and I want to support their livelihood, and I want them to be in the community. And I don't want to do all of this myself. One, it's impossible to do all of it myself. I don't have time, right? But I want to be in relationship with other people. I grow elderberries. Could I make my own elderberry syrup? Absolutely. I did that the first couple years. I was like, I can't do that and process the pears and process the tomatoes and do all of these things. Why don't I make a connection with an herbalist friend who will come and harvest those elderberries, make syrup, gift me a bottle of it, and then I'm supporting her business and she can sell that at the farmer's market. Her kids come to the food forest when she harvests those elderberries. They get the benefit of the food forest. I get the benefit of connection with her girls and with her. That's way, way more generative than me doing that alone. And that's where you get that kind of increasing beneficial relationships in your life that will be more generative, that help you be self-reliant and help you be reliant on others while at the same time producing some of your own food. And I think that, again, to that point of not everyone can be an herbalist and a gardener and a producer of grain and have animals, and not everyone can do that, right? Especially if you have a mortgage to pay and your kids are in school, or, it's just impossible. So given that, we have to create village culture, and we have to cultivate village culture in the society in which we're nested. And that's how you do it.
Yeah. And with that in mind, you've discussed before how permaculture finds people in times of transition. We seem to be a society transitioning to what? I don't know. I'd rather not ponder that question too long. But I think this would definitely be a time where people are shifting and looking for new answers, and maybe looking for village culture or looking for ways that they can support themselves safely and purposefully and live purpose-led lives. So when you say permaculture finds us in times of transition, is that kind of what you're referring to? How has that worked for you, and how have you seen it work for your clients?
Yeah, I mean, mostly what I've seen is when people come to permaculture design courses or are first introduced to permaculture, they're in this phase of life where they've either quit their job or they've moved to a new place, or they're in deep inquiry about what they're doing in their lives. And I think that the reason they come to permaculture is because it represents something positive. It represents a way of being and a philosophy of life that resonates for a lot of people. We have a huge kind of secular aspect to our society. A lot of people who no longer lean on some of the religions that are out there, right, for guidance. And so instead, I think not that permaculture is a religion, right? But I think the set of principles and the life design and the philosophy around it really resonates with people, because so many of us don't have a culture on which to feel grounded. And so permaculture and rooting into those principles makes people feel more grounded if they don't have traditions that they're bringing from their ancestors. And I think there's an invitation there to encourage people to look at their ancestors and look at the background that they come from, if that's available to you, and, and you're interested in that. But in parallel with that, I think there's this invitation that people have of like, why does this resonate so much with me? Again, permaculture, right? It's that there's something, that connection with the natural world that is inherent in all human beings. That's why it resonates with people. That's why people go back to it in times of transition, because I think that is where we want to be. We want to be in wild places. We want to be connected to the natural world. We've just lost that and we've become disconnected. And so I do think, like you said, that right now, this is a huge time of transition. And I think that it is a real big opportunity for permaculture to be even more elevated and to be a container for people, that when they do feel overwhelmed by the bigness of what is happening right now in the world, you can turn to these principles and these techniques and this ability to create beneficial relationships and say, hey, there is something that I can do here, and I have agency, and I can create community, and I can feel like I'm doing something positive. And I do think that that's what permaculture offers right now, that more and more people might come to it, because growing our food or foraging for our food, feeding ourselves is so fundamental to being a human being. Connecting in to the non-human species is so fundamental to being a human being.
And Kareen, am I right in my understanding that from the descriptions you're giving, permaculture may be a relatively new term, but the practices themselves are from time immemorial?
Yes. 100%. I mean, I think it's worth saying, and we should have said it earlier on, that this whole term, a lot of the techniques were innovated in part by Indigenous people, kind of repackaged by, these middle-class white dudes into this concept that
they're really good at that, middle-class white dudes.
They're really super good at doing that. And so, yes, a lot of this stuff is just inherent in Indigenous cultures, right? And how they view the world. And so I think that's another connection that people have, or why it resonates, is because it's something that, of course, Native cultures have known for years, time immemorial, like you say. And it's just this kind of Western culture that's been so kind of disconnected from that. And it's people relearning how to be humans in the world and how to live well in the world.
So for people who are interested in adopting this lifestyle, how can they learn more about permaculture? Do you have any resources that you recommend, any books, websites?
Yeah, I think, there's many ways. Well, they can go to my website, Broken Ground Permaculture, and I have a resources page with a bunch of videos. But, some of the books that I would recommend would be Practical Permaculture is a really good book. The Gaia's Garden is a really good home scale permaculture book. Those are kind of two good starting points. Rosemary Morrow's Earth User's Guide to Permaculture is also very good. I would also recommend that if people have this inkling, trying to find an intro to permaculture class or a weekend workshop like the one that you all hosted is a nice way to learn about permaculture, because there's so much on the internet, right? There's so much out there that it's sometimes hard to sift through exactly what permaculture is. And so trying to find, a small course or something is helpful as well. So all of those are good ways to kind of start that journey.
Well, thank you, Kareen. You have given us so much to chew on today. I know, like, probably the rest of the day I'm going to be like just sitting and dwelling on permaculture. So I appreciate it so much and your time and expertise.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been delightful to talk with you,
Yeah, it's
Ashton.
been a blast as always. And if our listeners want to connect with you in any way, what would be the best way for them to do that?
So they can go to my website, brokengroundpermaculture.com. They can also, if they are on Instagram, I do have an Instagram account at brokengroundmt. Those are probably the best ways to get in touch with me.
Okay, well, I'll be sure to link those in the show notes so that everybody can check that out. And again, Kareen, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thanks so much, Ashton.